Hello, I'm Damien from Urban International. I'm a Warsaw International Resource Manager here. And today we'll talk you through the Chinese language. So whereas you want to develop your business in China, or you're already thinking of it, or you're already doing it in some ways, I thought it was really good to clarify some of the complexity of the language and to know the truth about the Chinese language or some truth about the Chinese language. Here at Urban, we're working with the Lime network, with a network of freelancers, and we call them Lime because it stands for local in-market experts, and they're all based in their native countries. And for this presentation, I had the great help of Lei, who is one of our Chinese Limes, and it's been with us since 2016. So let's just start with this presentation. So just to have to talk a little bit about the agenda, I will go through the history and the evolution of written and spoken Chinese. We talk about what is Chinese language today about, and how important it is if you want to develop your business there. What advice is to take on board to do it right and to avoid mistakes coming from cliches or other misconceptions. So at the end of the presentation, I hope you will never say, talking about a Chinese person, that this person is Chinese and speaks and writes Chinese, because that would be like as a misconception as telling that a person is European and speaks European, and we're going to understand that. So talking about writing Chinese, written Chinese is one of the oldest still in use system of writing, and it appeared like 1500 years ago. At the beginning, it was used for oracles and divination, and that's why we can still find pictograms like you see on this picture on turtle shells. And the evolution of writing in Chinese language is as it appears in this table. So we all have in mind that Chinese characters kind of look like the symbol I wanted to mean. Like we can see the fish, for example, on the fifth line. That really looks like a fish, and more. And after with the years, it became a character, but it came from a pictogram. I will talk you through that a little bit more later. But a good thing to know is that today there are only two written Chinese in use, so traditional Chinese and simplified Chinese, as you can see framed in red. And that the only thing you need to know when it comes to writing written Chinese, the only thing you need to know is it simplified or traditional Chinese? That's it. That's all you need to know. That's all you need to understand. And we can see that it is simple when we see the map of the countries where Chinese is written and spoken. Mainland China is using simplified Chinese. Taiwan, for example, is using traditional Chinese. We can see that it's quite clear, and it's the only thing you know when you have different version of your website in Chinese. Is it simplified or traditional Chinese you need to use? But when it comes to spoken Chinese, and even in the search world now with like a search voice search, sorry, we can come to some challenges regarding the spoken language. And when it comes to spoken Chinese, it's way more complicated than it is for the written Chinese. They have a lot of varieties and dialects, all coming from different tones. So the pronunciation itself is not different, but the tones make it very different. And even if they are using the same characters, whereas it is traditional or simplified, they will have different tones. So the same character will be pronounced very differently because of the tone. So for example, Hong Kong sounds more like Heongong when it's in Cantonese spoken language, but when it's in Mandarin, you will hear more Xianggang. And it's very different. The tone is different, but it makes it like it's another word completely. And even in really geographically close areas of China, people can find it really hard to understand each other when they're speaking. And the irony is that when they're writing, they can. So they can communicate with writing. Text would work, but verbally is very hard. The Leif is going to do a little demonstration here on a video of how different it is to say the same sentence in Cantonese and Mandarin.
我是挪威人，我係挪威人。
And the second one was Mandarin. We can see the difference here of tones. To tell you a little bit more about tones, in Mandarin, for example, which is spoken in 60% of China, they have 5 different tones. We can hear here with the example of ma.
Different tones. Mother, ma, favorite, ma, horse, ma, curse, ma, question mark, ma.
And even if it doesn't sound super clear for people who are not used to Chinese language, the tones are very different. They have 5 tones in Mandarin, and in Cantonese they have 6 different tones. So we can already understand that they're definitely not going to pronounce the same characters in the same way. So that's the different tones of Cantonese.
C, 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 C.
And again, it's different to get the tones, but definitely for Chinese people, it is quite clear. So that's another map now about the spoken Chinese in the different regions of China. And we can see that it's really more diverse than the written Chinese when it was completely uniform. Mandarin, we talk a lot about Mandarin. Usually we think that most of Chinese people living in mainland China speak Mandarin. The government tries to make it like the lingua franca in China, but it's still only spoken by less than 70% of Chinese people. So it's not completely what we think it is. And I like to compare the 2 maps. So to the right, we've got the map of the written Chinese. We can see China in green, almost completely in green. We can see 2 little dots in blue, traditional Chinese, Macau and Hong Kong. And we can see Taiwan as well in blue. To the left, we can see the spoken Chinese and all the differences. So that's where the big difference I was talking about before is. And on top of that, because it doesn't stop there for the spoken Chinese, they have some cultural differences too. So Cantonese is spoken with the same tones in Taiwan and Hong Kong, for example. But they're going to use different vocabulary because of the cultural differences between Taiwan and Hong Kong, which is huge. So they have extra words, and it's a little bit like sneakers and trainers in British English and American English. So again, even when you try to target Cantonese spoken Chinese for voice search, for example, aren't we? It's still within the spoken Chinese. It would be interesting to know the region that you want to target exactly. And it's the same for all the different spoken form of Chinese. So we can see again that here in-market experts are essential, and they need to be exactly where you want to develop your business. What about the Chinese language today? Well, we going to talk about the different characters in Chinese, written Chinese. That's the most important, of course, because the web and search is still mainly written. What are the different group of characters in Chinese? And we're going to talk about Pinyin a little bit too. So the first group of characters are the one we know. It's a bit cliche because we think that it's all about that, but it's not. They are the pictograms. So they are characters, Chinese characters coming from a drawing of basic objects, like we can see the sun or a horse or the fish like before. But they're only one group of Chinese character. The other group is ideographs. So it's an abstract representation. It's an abstract representation, so really easy to see with numbers. The number of lines will be like the character, and the same for below and middle. It's quite all about the symbol. And finally, the last group is a compound between pictograph and ideograph. So it's a combination of the two, and it's what most of Chinese characters are about. So it's not all about pictographs. Pictographs are actually really rare. We're really talking about basic objects there. But when it comes to a verb or to a notion or concept, it will always be a combination between pictographs and ideograph. So we're really far from the cliche that, oh yeah, one Chinese character actually represents something. They don't all do that, but there is some representation. As we can see, the tree and forest, that's a good one. So you've got the pictograph of tree, and to have the character of a forest, you've got 3 trees. Man and prisoner, that's a good example too. And the one I really liked is the love character, and we're going to talk about it a bit more. It's very poetic though. We've got like the ideograph breathe into on top in pale blue, so that the below graph, and the heart, which is actually a pictograph representing a heart way before it's been simplified. And you've got another ideographs about gracious movement. So love in Chinese is expressed this way: breathe into the heart with a gracious movement. It's very, very poetic. Pinyin, finally, is a way to represent characters and express in Chinese language using the Roman alphabet. So trying to write with the Roman alphabet Chinese word pronounced the right way. We use accents to differentiate the tones. So everything in brackets is Pinyin. Is that the different pronunciation rules in Pinyin? And the different accent or tone mark that we put. So here, transcription in Chinese is quite hard too, because we have to think about like these rules, and we need to add the tone too. So we've got a little bit of illustration thanks to Lei.
Absolutely. 毫无疑问 ，adorable， 可爱极了 ，amazing， 太神奇了 ，anytime， 随时吩咐 ，almost， 差不多了 ，awful， 好可怕 ，allow me， 让我来 美、胡扯、bingo、中了、boring、真无聊。
Thank you, Lei. Today, Chinese characters today, the simplified ones, why do they exist as opposed as the traditional ones? It's because the government wanted to simplify the characters to make it more accessible and promote literacy all over China and try to kind of unify it. They really, really widely promoted Mandarin as a spoken language too. So when you write simplified Chinese, you can pronounce it only with the Mandarin tones. That's quite interesting. So the aim of the government after the Communist Party came to power was to really unify in China and have really Mandarin as a lingua franca and a new way of writing Chinese. Mixed success because we saw the varieties of languages, spoken languages still exists, and in Taiwan and in Macau we're still writing in traditional Chinese. So we can see that it had its limits, but it's quite interesting to know too, especially when you want to target mainland China. So it's known, I mean, simplified Chinese, still written language, is known as Baiwa, which means plain language. But again, not everyone in China wanted to adopt this new way of writing. We can see the difference. So it's really literally simplifying the traditional character with less lines. And we can talk a little bit about the political tension between China and Taiwan as an example of why it hasn't been that widely spread, simplified Chinese. And there is a very good example, which is the same than before, to say love. You can see the heart as a pictograph in the Chinese character to say love. And in simplified Chinese, the heart has been taken away and out of the Chinese characters. So the people in Taiwan, for example, because they are quite ironic about the Chinese government, can say that the Chinese government wanted to take the heart out of the love of the Chinese characters in general. So of course that's a little story. But if you want to target people there, if you want to develop your business in Taiwan, you need to be aware of this kind of political tension and the way that it would be quite inappropriate to offer a website in simplified Chinese for a Taiwanese audience. It would rather be better to have it in English than in simplified Chinese, actually. And the best case, of course, is to have your website, one version simplified, one version traditional. To talk a little bit about Chinese and your business, I wanted to start with the ethnicity. So I told you at the beginning of the presentation why we shouldn't say, oh, this person is Chinese, because China is made up of 56 distinct ethnic groups, and Han Chinese is the main one. So 92% of Chinese population, China mainland, and more than 97% of the Taiwanese populations are Han. So a person is not a Chinese person, it's majority a Han Chinese person. So we know the impact of the Chinese population in the world, general population. The 19% of the Chinese of the worldwide population are Han Chinese. And the dynasty, this dynasty of Han, because the ethnic groups are related to different dynasties too. this dynasty of Han Chinese wanted to unify China, gave the effort to kind of really have something harmonious in this huge land. So that's why they are the main ethnicity, but not the only one. So again, to break the cliche, to fight the stigma about Chinese population, you need to incorporate that in your strategy. You need to think of that too. A little bit about the Chinese population worldwide. We can see that lots of Han Chinese or non-Han Chinese people live abroad, with the first of the countries, Taiwan, of course, and followed by Hong Kong. But we've got Indonesia first, actually, for overseas of population where Chinese people are expats, in Thailand, Malaysia a lot, United States too. Once again, with a different version of your website, you need to think what is going to be your geographical target too. That's very important to know. And again, to know, do I need only a simplified Chinese version of my website or both? I would always say 90% of the case, you need both. Then you're sure to not make any mistake. And we can see in these graphs that both versions are definitely important. You want to target people in Hong Kong, in Macau, in Taiwan too, as well as in China, depending on your business, of course. But that's something to take into account. And to do a keyword research, for example, really, if you want to do a keyword research for SEO purposes or PPC purposes, think abroad with the Chinese population too, because lots of people are living abroad and you want to know what they type into and you want to target them too. A very, very useful graph about which Chinese for which market is this one. If you need to take one slide out of this presentation, it will be this one. Then you're sure to not make any mistake when you target a particular market. So you can see that in China, I put written simplified Chinese mainly, let's say, and spoken Mandarin mainly. Hong Kong, completely different. Written traditional spoken Cantonese. Macau, the same than Hong Kong. Taiwan, completely different again. Traditional and written, spoken Mandarin. And Singapore will be like in mainland China, but don't forget the English language, of course, in Singapore. So that's very, very, very interesting to have that in mind, to print that out, to leave it on your desk, and always, always to refer to it. So that's more a slide about SEO, let's say, which hreflang tag should you use to target the right market. And ZH is the norm, just because it's a native name of the Chinese language. I'm not going to try to pronounce that, sorry, in Pinyin. It's going to be difficult for me, and it's an adjective for Chinese too. And Han refers to the ethnicity I was talking about before. So to target the market in general, if you have a simplified version of your website, simplified Chinese version of your website, and you want just to indicate that to Google, you can use ZH -HANS. So literally Chinese, Han, S for simplified. But you can also target different markets and always use the ZH followed by the ISO code of the country. And I put them all there. Previously, and you can still see it on some websites, ZH-CH for China, S for simplified, or T for traditional, when used, but not that much anymore. And on the last publication I saw by Google, they were really like promoting the Han, H-A-N. So as a summary for this presentation, and I hope you liked it, and it kind of like, it has fought some stigmas, some cliches. I would say always think simplified or traditional Chinese for your website, for the version of your website, always. Both are better. Whoever you try to target, then you should not make any huge mistake with Taiwan's people, for example. So always think of the political impact it can have to have only a simplified Chinese version of your website, and so forth. So that's really something to keep in mind. Always refer to the slide with a different market and spoken and written language. And a good Chinese localization can only be done with the right spoken language, of course, the right written language, and the right market targets, because again, we're talking about this different vocabulary like American English, British English. So as a summary, ultimate last conclusion is you need people in markets to make sure that you're targeting the right people with the right language, whether it is spoken or written. And thank you so much for watching that. I'm sure that now you will stop to see someone and say that this person is Chinese and speaks Chinese. I hope so. Thank you very much for watching, and see you soon.